shot him with a 9mm handgun 17 times.
A human being by inflicting multiple injuries with a knife and thereby causing her death. You could be subject to punishment up to death or life imprisonment.
Two individuals decided to chase down the victim, and one of them shot him in the head.
In January 2023, a confrontation in Greene County, Mississippi ended in tragedy. Michael Holder showed up at the home where his ex-wife, Renee, was staying with her boyfriend, Logan Wayne Wright. What began as a tense encounter turned deadly. Logan was shot and killed, and another person was injured during the incident. Holder was arrested and charged with capital murder and aggravated assault. From the beginning, he claimed he acted in self-defense, saying shots were fired at him from the woods, and he was simply returning fire. The case went to trial in Jackson County. Nearly 2 years later, a jury found him guilty on both counts. Emotions ran high in the courtroom as the verdict was read. Members of both families wept openly. Before the sentence was finalized, Logan's family was given a chance to speak.
You will have to answer for that when Jesus comes for us. And I can't live with that thought of your blood on my hands. I pray that God has mercy on you.
If you are lucky, you will get to hug him again one day. We do not get that blessing. That was ripped away from us by a senseless act of violence.
He repeated his claim of self-defense, saying he feared for his life the night Logan was killed.
They were shooting at me and her. It was coming from behind toward the car, toward the woods. I was being shot at, and I was returning fire.
Holder also took the stand once again. He turned to Logan's family and offered an apology.
I'd like to say I apologize. I'm sorry to the Wayne White family. I didn't know Logan. I didn't have an issue with him. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry for my parents. I'm sorry for the loss of everyone.
His voice was quiet as he said he never had a problem with Logan and that he was sorry for what had happened. The judge then sentenced Holder to life in prison without parole for capital murder, plus 20 years for aggravated assault to be served consecutively. On August 27, 2022, Shamar Duncan, 22, and his two brothers were out for the evening, hoping to meet people and enjoy the night. Near the Hampton Inn at Meridian and Maryland Streets, they encountered a group of Dutch soldiers who were in town for training at the Muscatatuck Urban Training Center. According to Duncan, a comment from someone in the group sparked tension, leading to a verbal exchange that escalated into a brief physical altercation. After one of his brothers was knocked down, Duncan and his siblings returned to their vehicle. Still upset, Duncan retrieved a firearm, and as they passed by the hotel again, he fired several shots toward the entrance where the soldiers were standing. The gunfire resulted in the tragic death of Corporal Simi Poetsema and injuries to two others. Duncan was arrested and later charged with multiple offenses, including murder and attempted murder. During his trial in January 2025, he admitted to firing the shots but claimed he never meant to hurt anyone, describing his actions as an emotional response to the earlier confrontation.
Just kind of angry, probably, that, the situation that just happened. So just kind of, I wouldn't say making a statement, like saying it's not okay, or, it's not okay what just happened.
After 5 days in court, the jury found him guilty on all counts. On February 24, 2025, Duncan was sentenced to 105 years in prison, 60 years for murder, 35 years for attempted murder, and 10 years for aggravated battery, respectively. On the evening of October 23, 2022, in Osceola County, Florida, a simple traffic mistake turned fatal. Clifford Tavares, a 41-year-old father and longtime Gatorland employee, was driving his silver Dodge Charger when he accidentally cut off a Subaru Impreza near South Florida Parkway and Poinciana Boulevard. Inside the Subaru were Brandon Quartieri behind the wheel and Brandon Singh in the passenger seat. The near miss should have ended there. Instead, the boys responded with aggression, Enraged, they began following Tavares. The chase continued until they caught up to him near Buenaventura Boulevard and Simpson Road. Then, without warning, Singh pulled a gun and shot Tavares in the head from inside the moving vehicle. Tavares lost control and crashed into parked cars. He was rushed to the hospital, but died from his injuries a few days later.
They were upset about having to drive off the road. So in response, the two individuals decided to chase down the victim, and one of them shot him in the head.
Authorities quickly began their investigation. Surveillance footage from the area showed both the crash and the moments leading up to it. The video played a critical role in identifying the suspects and the vehicle. In an effort to cover their tracks, Quartieri sold the Subaru shortly after the incident, but the evidence had already caught up to them. On November 30th, detectives arrested Singh, charging him with first-degree murders and tampering with evidence. Quartieri was also taken into custody and charged as an accessory after the fact.
There is absolutely no evidence that indicates this was anything but a cold-blooded murder. This is a typical road rage case, and we've seen these cases, and now they're escalating to this nature, but guess what? You do that here in Osceola County, we're going to arrest you, we're going to hunt you down, and we're going to put you in jail.
At a press conference, Sheriff Marcos Lopez confirmed there had been no prior contact between the suspects and the victim. No argument, no words were exchanged, just an outburst of rage that turned deadly. On the morning of January 1st, 2025, a disturbing incident took place in Mobile, Alabama. Genesis Tanksley was accused of shooting her husband, Lazarus Tanksley, near their home. Shortly after the shooting, Genesis drove to the Lucky 7 convenience store on St. Stephen's Road. In her statement to investigators and later in a jailhouse interview, she claimed she was giving a man a ride to the store, but surveillance footage told a different story. Video evidence reportedly showed her arriving alone. Meanwhile, a key eyewitness came forward saying Lazarus had run toward them after the shooting, shouting, "She shot me." This account directly contradicted Genesis's claim that someone else was responsible. Later that same day, Genesis is believed to have returned to the scene of the shooting, picked up her husband, and drove him to the hospital. Afterward, she went to her father's home in distress.
She was like in a lot of despair, just very distraught, basically saying, Larry is I think she said some dude shot him, and he died in my arms, and I don't know what to do.
Detectives soon began gathering evidence. A search warrant executed at her father's house on Vader Street led to the discovery of several weapons. In her vehicle, investigators also found a bullet casing on the dashboard, a knit hat, and a phone, items she claimed belonged to the person who allegedly shot her husband. The detective from the Mobile County Sheriff's Office testified that there was no evidence to support her version of events. He stated that all the evidence pointed to Genesis as the main suspect.
After the investigation, there's absolutely no evidence to substantiate that. The evidence presented today, in fact, pointed to her being the perpetrator of the murder. The judge found probable cause to send it to the grand jury. During a preliminary hearing, the judge reviewed the testimony and ruled there was probable cause to move the case forward. The case was sent to a grand jury for review. At the hearing, Genesis's attorney requested a reduction of her $150,000 bond, but the judge denied it. As of April 2025, Genesis Tanksley remains in custody. In the early hours of November 19, 2021, 37-year-old Fred O'Bannon was working an overnight construction shift in Louisville, Kentucky, helping direct traffic near the Watterson Expressway and Dixie Highway. While seated in his work truck, O'Bannon was fatally shot. Authorities later identified the suspect as Keyshaun Stewart, who also fired at a nearby police officer assisting with traffic control. Despite being wounded, the officer returned fire and managed to apprehend Stewart at the scene. Stewart was charged with multiple serious offenses, including murder, attempted murder of a police officer, and illegal possession of a firearm, as he had a prior felony conviction. Over time, questions were raised about his mental competency, leading to a long series of court delays. By early 2025, the case had already been delayed 4 times, including missed arraignments and postponed hearings due to the need for expert medical evaluations. At one point, even when the evaluation was completed, the court was forced to reschedule again because the evaluating doctor was unavailable to testify. All the while, Anita O'Bannon, Fred's mother, continued to attend every court hearing, holding on to hope for accountability.
He took my son's life, but he gave me a life sentence. Because I got to deal with this and deal with this the rest of my life. I don't trust our justice system. I don't trust it at all. The young man who killed my son claimed he was insane.
The repeated delays have taken a visible toll on her emotionally and mentally.
This is my baby on my neck. I carry him around all the time. I miss my child. He was my youngest one. You know, I miss my son every day.
She has voiced deep frustration, feeling that the justice system moves too slowly, while her family remains stuck in grief. For her, each postponed hearing is a painful reminder that her son is gone, and justice remains just out of reach. In the fall of 1996, a shocking crime unfolded in Irvine, California, when 22-year-old Jean Han plotted to murder her identical twin sister, Sunny Han. The two had once been close, but their relationship had turned bitter. The tension boiled over after Sunny accused Jean of stealing her car and credit cards, leading to Jean's arrest. Jean enlisted the help of two boys, Archie Bryant and John Sayerath, convincing them to carry out the plan. On November 6, 1996, the boys posed as magazine salesmen to get into Sunny's apartment. Once inside, they tied up Sunny and her roommate, Helen Kim, and locked them in a closet. Miraculously, Sunny managed to call 911 from a hidden cell phone. Police arrived in time to stop the attack. During the trial, Sunny surprisingly stood by her sister and even testified in her defense. Despite being the intended victim, she expressed forgiveness. Meanwhile, Jean gained media attention and reportedly made money from interviews tied to the high-profile case, earning her the nickname the Evil Twin from law enforcement and the press alike.
Trying to make as much money off of this case as you possibly can, aren't you? I mean, that's why you have an agent, right?
Well, if I were to make money, yes, I would like to make money on this.
You want to make money off this case, don't you?
If people are going to pay me, then why not?
In 1998, Jean was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, burglary, and false imprisonment. She was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison. After serving nearly 20 years, Jean was granted parole in 2018 and released from prison. Her release was opposed by the Orange County District Attorney's Office, who called her manipulative and dangerous. Yet, Sunny once again stood by Jean during her parole bid, despite everything that had happened. In December 2024, 21-year-old Terance Darnell Pope Jr. was fatally shot while sitting in his mother's car at a Best Buy parking lot in Sanford, Florida. He had arranged to meet 3 individuals to buy electronics for $400, a deal set up through private messages. Surveillance footage showed suspects Khalil Hunter and Shanavius Dorsey arriving shortly before the shooting.
Terance Pope was going to possibly purchase electronics from the 3 individuals.
Investigators later discovered that the sale was actually a planned robbery. Pope had sensed something was wrong, according to text messages on his phone. Police believe Hunter fired the shots, while Dorsey took Pope's firearm. They fled with the help of a third person, James Nelson, who acted as the getaway driver. On January 9, 2025, Hunter and Dorsey were arrested and charged with first-degree felony murder and armed robbery. Nelson turned himself in 2 days later and faced the same charges.
It's a very unfortunate incident. They all were young men. They were all young men, and with so much of life ahead of them, 1 is now deceased and 3 have destroyed their lives, and I'm sure the lives of their families.
In February, a Seminole County grand jury indicted Hunter and Nelson, while Dorsey received additional charges, including accessory after the fact, tampering with evidence, and theft of a firearm. All 3 suspects are currently being held at the John E. Polk Correctional Facility as they await trial. In the early morning of January 5, 2025, a 911 call came from a quiet neighborhood in Davenport, Florida. On the line was a girl asking for help. She told dispatchers that her stepfather had a knife and that something had happened to her mother. Deputies from the Osceola County Sheriff's Office quickly responded to the home on Bogey Drive. According to the report, they found 45-year-old Mackinson Devalcin near a bedroom doorway with a minor injury. Inside the room, they found 43-year-old Enes Pierre, who was unresponsive. A kitchen knife was found nearby. The young girl later explained to investigators that she woke up to the sound of her mother calling out. She said she saw her mother injured and was told to call 911. She also recalled seeing her stepfather with a knife and hearing him shouting. Devalcin was taken to Orlando Regional Medical Center for treatment.
He's going to stay no bonded on the warrant. It's a charge of premeditated murder.
Devalcin was charged with premeditated murder. Although he couldn't appear in court in person, a judge reviewed the case and ordered that he be held without bond while the legal process continues. On the night of July 9, 2024, gunfire erupted at the Rapalo Apartments on Marta Circle in Kissimmee, Florida. The incident was later confirmed to be a home invasion robbery that turned deadly. By the time deputies arrived, 19-year-old Adrian Gonzalez and 19-year-old Jimon Cleus had been fatally shot. Another person at the scene was injured but survived. Detectives from the Osceola County Sheriff's Office began piecing together what happened, identifying the case as a robbery linked to narcotics activity. Within days, they made their first 2 arrests. Quentin Douglas was taken into custody on July 15, followed by Isaiah Bay on July 16. Both were charged with homicide. Months later, on December 9th, a third suspect, 18-year-old Marcus Prevelis, was arrested and charged with murder while engaged in a home invasion robbery. Investigators connected him to the case using DNA found on a pair of black and yellow Air Jordan sneakers. Surveillance footage had shown the robbery victim wearing similar shoes during the encounter. Prevelis initially told investigators that he arrived after the incident to help find Cleus, claiming the sneakers were handed to him by another suspect. The shoes were later recovered from a vehicle believed to have been used in the getaway.
By doing law enforcement, doing their job, it gives everybody around that stay around that area, a sense of, relief, because, they can go around places knowing, their safety is not in jeopardy.
Based on the evidence, Prevelis was booked into jail and appeared before a judge on December 10th, where he was ordered held without bond. All the suspects remain in custody at the Osceola County Jail awaiting trial. In November 2024, Kelsey Glover, 35, was charged with first-degree murder in the death of her daughter, Giselle Glover, in Poinciana, Florida. Giselle, who had type 1 diabetes, became severely ill after her mother allegedly stopped her insulin treatment. A roommate later witnessed Kelsey holding Giselle underwater in the bathtub and attempted to intervene, leading to a confrontation. The roommate fled and called 911. When authorities arrived, Giselle was found unresponsive and later died at the hospital. Kelsey was initially charged with aggravated assault, but after further investigation, the charge was upgraded to murder based on evidence and the timeline of events. During her initial court appearance, Glover was calm, quiet. Her attorneys later raised concerns about her mental health, and a competency evaluation was ordered.
Based on my conversations that I've had up here with counsel, I'm going to grant the motion to continue the pretrial detention hearing to December 4th.
The judge also ruled that she would remain in custody without bond, at least until her next hearing, which was scheduled for December 4th, 2024. As of April 2025, Kelsey Glover remains in custody, awaiting trial. In the early morning of April 14, 2003, a quiet neighborhood in Charlestown, Indiana, became the scene of a troubling incident. A young girl was asleep in her home when an unknown individual broke in. During the break-in, she was raped, and when her stepfather tried to intervene, he was seriously injured. The suspect fled, leaving behind a crucial piece of evidence, a pair of jeans. The stepfather survived but suffered long-term effects from his injuries. Despite an extensive investigation, the case went cold in 2005 due to a lack of leads. In September 2020, Detective Jason Brody of the Charlestown Police Department reopened the case after speaking with the wife of the injured stepfather, who expressed concerns about the unsolved crime. Advancements in forensic DNA technology, including genetic genealogy analysis, provided new avenues for investigation. In December 2022, a tip led investigators to consider David Edward Hollowell, then 52, and his 2 brothers as potential suspects. DNA samples were collected from the brothers, and analysis revealed that while his brothers were excluded as contributors, the DNA found at the crime scene was closely related to theirs. This evidence pointed to Hollowell as the likely perpetrator. On July 20th, 2023, Hollowell was arrested and charged with attempted murder, rape, child molesting, and burglary. He was held on a $250,000 cash bond.
So I would request that Mr. Hollowell remain in custody pursuant to his already set bond and he not be released pending the trial of this matter.
In court, his defense attorney, Mickey Weber, argued that the DNA evidence was illegally taken and was insufficient to warrant his detention.
They didn't ask for a warrant. They didn't ask for Dennis's permission to get his DNA. They just went and swiped it off of his car while he was at work. and pulled him over and pretended it was for one reason when really it was so they could take his driver's license and swab it for DNA.
However, the judge maintained the bond, emphasizing the seriousness of the charges. Hollowell's trial commenced in October 2024. After deliberation, the jury found him guilty on all charges. In October 2024, a tragic incident occurred in Osceola County, Florida, when a boy named Riley Hogaback was found unresponsive in a water-filled ditch on his family's property off North Cannonsville Road in Kissimmee. The ditch, located near a pig pen, had been dug earlier in the year to manage flooding and had since filled with murky runoff water. At the time, 25-year-old Cheyenne Starfite, the boy's stepmother, was in charge of watching over him and his siblings. She initially told investigators she was inside the trailer doing laundry when the drowning happened. However, her account changed during later interviews. One of the siblings in the home reported that she had been asleep and that Riley had been outside alone, undressed as a punishment. The trailer, according to deputies, was more than 300 feet away from the ditch. Investigators also noted that the home environment was hazardous, with unsafe items and poor conditions. When Riley was found, emergency services were called and he was taken to the hospital, but sadly, he did not survive. After reviewing all the evidence, including conflicting statements and environmental concerns, deputies arrested Cheyenne Fite in December 2024. She was charged with aggravated manslaughter and is being held without bond while awaiting trial. Chris Brandon Foyles, 42, is at the center of a tragic and chilling case involving the murder of his girlfriend, 34-year-old Megan Ashley Stedman. Megan Stedman, a mother from Spokane, Washington, vanished while traveling with her estranged boyfriend, Chris Foyles. The two were spotted in the Bozeman-Livingston area. At the time, Foyles was under a no-contact order, yet he and Megan were together in a 1973 white Landau motorhome with a red stripe. The vehicle, which was later reported to have been painted blue, was seen with Megan's black and white brindle dog. Foyles and Stedman reached Idaho Falls, Idaho, and parked near a Walmart. An argument between the couple escalated to violence when Foyles stabbed Stedman in a fit of rage. He confessed to stabbing her, fearing she would report him to the authorities. Authorities found a suspicious RV in Idaho Falls that matched the description of Stedman's motorhome. When police approached, they encountered Foyles, who admitted to the murder, saying, "I am Chris Foyles. I killed my girlfriend. She is in the RV." Inside, officers discovered Megan's lifeless body. A grand jury in Bonneville County indicted Foyles on charges of first-degree murder, along with enhancements for using a deadly weapon and charges for destroying evidence.
This indictment alleges your true and correct name is Chris Brandon Foyles. Is this your true and correct name?
Yes, sir.
The indictment alleges 2 counts. Count 1 actually has 2 parts. Part 1 advises that you, on or about December 15, 2023 to January 12 of 2024 in Bonneville County, Idaho, willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought killed Megan Ashley Stedman, a human being, by inflicting multiple injuries with a knife and thereby causing her death. I need to advise you that if you are found guilty or you plead guilty to that charge in count 1, part 1, you could be subject to punishment up to death or life imprisonment. You understand that charge and possible penalty? Count 1, part 2 notifies you that if you are in fact convicted of murder in the first degree as contained in count 1, you could be subject to enhanced penalty of an additional 15 years of imprisonment. Claim is because you used a knife as a deadly weapon. Do you understand count 1, part 2 of that indictment? And do you understand the possible additional penalties? Count 2 alleges that you, on or about December 15 to January 12 of 2024 in Bonneville County, Idaho, you willfully destroyed parts of a human body, knowing that those body parts were about to be produced, used, or discovered as evidence in a felony inquiry or investigation authorized by law with the intent to prevent it from being produced, used, or discovered. This destruction of evidence claim carries a 5-year maximum incarceration and up to a $10,000 fine. Do you understand that charge and possible penalties?
I do, Your Honor.
Mr. Foils, do you need to ask your counsel any questions before I ask you to enter a plea in these matters?
I'll have my counsel speak for me on that.
Go ahead, Mr. Archibald.
Yes, I'll enter the not guilty plea for him.
All right. With respect to count 1, part 1, murder in the first degree, how does Mr. Foils plead?
Not guilty.
Regarding count 1, part 2, the enhancement penalty, how does Mr. Foils plead?
Not guilty.
And regarding count 2, destruction of evidence, how does Mr. Foils plead?
Not guilty.
Clerk will enter those on the record.
The indictment was accompanied by the announcement from prosecutor Randy Neal that the state would seek the death penalty if Foils were convicted. Foils was arraigned in Bonneville County, where he pleaded not guilty, and he was denied bail. However, as the investigation progressed, it was determined that the murder had occurred in Montana, not Idaho, leading to Foils' extradition. He was transferred to Gallatin County, Montana, where the charges were officially moved to the state. In Gallatin County District Court, Foils pleaded not guilty to the charges, including deliberate homicide. He remained in custody without the possibility of bail, awaiting further proceedings. On the evening of November 11th, 2020, a horrific crime shattered the peace of Lake Morton, a quiet neighborhood in Lakeland, Florida. Edie Yates Henderson, a former city commissioner, and her husband, David Henderson, were brutally murdered in their own home. Investigators later found that the couple had been bound and killed before an attempt was made to set their house on fire.
David and Edie lost their lives because they stood in his way. They simply had the misfortune of owning what he wanted to steal.
As detectives began piecing together the crime, evidence pointed toward Marcel Gerald Walden. Surveillance footage placed him near the Hendersons' home around the time of the murders. On his phone, police discovered disturbing images, photos of the couple restrained, and others unintentionally capturing Walden's shoes and what appeared to be a weapon. DNA found at the scene further tied him to the crime. In the days that followed, Walden was seen pawning jewelry with 2 associates, Jarvis Collins and Roderick Burgess. These men later testified about their activities, including efforts to sell items believed to have belonged to the victims. The trial began in January 2024. Over several emotional weeks, the court heard detailed testimony and viewed graphic evidence.
You don't want to present any mitigation evidence, including Dr. Eisenstein or the video?
Moving on.
On January 31st, the jury found Walden guilty on all charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder. When the sentencing phase began, Walden waived the opportunity to present any mitigating evidence, no testimony from mental health professionals, and no appeals to his personal background.
We respect and appreciate the process, but no amount of justice can return what we in the community have lost, nor truly bring peace. And while many speak of closure, I feel that that may never truly come. However, we must and we will continue to push forward, honoring their memories, service, and continuing to live life in a way that would make them proud.
In court, 7 people delivered powerful victim impact statements, speaking of the pain and loss caused by the murders. Among them was Todd, Edie's son, who spoke on behalf of the family.
There are 3 more that I will read on behalf of the family and friends, starting with Melly Henderson Clark regarding her brother David. I'm sorry that my parents and I can't be there in person to speak to you today. My father is 93 and partially blind. My mother is 87 and recovering from major surgery. They have been so traumatized by David's death that they are completely different people than they were before his murder.
Some, too overwhelmed with grief, had their letters read aloud by others. David's sister, for example, explained how their elderly parents had been so devastated by his death that they had become shadows of their former selves.
And the state is asking, in this case, that you recommend the full measure of justice for these vile, evil crimes.
I suggest to you that life in prison is the appropriate sentence. It's severe punishment and is significant punishment, and it is also just punishment. My client, Mr. Walden, will leave prison in a coffin. Your recommendation will go a long way in determining when.
Walden's attorney then offered only a short plea for the jury to consider a life sentence instead of the death penalty.
On behalf of Mr. Walden, I respectfully would ask that, taking all the totality of the circumstances, that you recommend a sentence of life instead of death.
On February 6, 2024, the jury returned its recommendation, death by a vote of 11-1. Under Florida's updated laws, such a majority is now sufficient to impose the death penalty. With the jury's decision made, all that remains is for the judge to deliver the final sentence. Christina Parcell, a veterinary technician in Greenville, South Carolina, was embroiled in a long and painful custody battle with her ex-husband, John Mello. After Mello took their daughter to Italy without permission in 2020, Christina fought in court and regained custody by April 2021. She returned to the U.S. and settled with her daughter in the Canebrake neighborhood, hoping to move on. During this time, Mello developed a close bond with Zachary Hughes, a Juilliard-trained pianist, who soon became involved in the custody dispute. Hughes began harassing Christina on Mello's behalf, escalating his behavior as the case turned against Mello. On October 13, 2021, Hughes disguised himself as a deliveryman and attacked Christina in her home, fatally stabbing her and leaving her body surrounded by rose petals. Her young daughter witnessed the aftermath, but was not physically harmed. Security footage captured a man matching Hughes's description riding a bicycle in and out of the neighborhood that morning. DNA under Christina's fingernails matched Hughes, and other digital evidence placed him at the scene. A short time later, he was arrested and charged with murder, first-degree burglary, harassment, and possession of a deadly weapon.
So the question is, how did Zach Hughes become involved in this case? Well, Zach Hughes had a relationship with John Mello starting in about October of 2020, around the time when he left for Italy. And that relationship grew. And it grew to the point where Zach Hughes began inserting himself into this custody battle at the behest of John Mello. And they began doing things like sending photos of her to the neighbors in an effort to shame her, an effort to show that she's a bad mother. And as the custody dispute elevated, it elevated into a situation where custody might not go in John Mello's favor. And at that point, Zach Hughes made the ultimate decision. Ladies and gentlemen, I hold in my hand the indictments from the grand jury charging Zach Hughes with harassment and burglary first and murder. And the grand jury true-billed these cases. They came out, and these are the charging documents. And while the defendant at this point in this case is certainly clothed in innocence, once you hear the evidence from that chair, you hear the evidence that's presented to you, you're going to find beyond a reasonable doubt, and the evidence will show that Zach Hughes is a cold-blooded killer. And he committed murder, he committed harassment, and he committed burglary first. Thank you.
In court, Hughes confessed to the killing, but claimed he did it to protect the girl from abuse, a claim that was never supported by any credible evidence.
Do you remember how many vehicles were parked in the driveway when you got there?
One.
When you arrived at the house and you got off your bike, what did you do?
I laid my bike down in the driveway and I took my backpack off and I took out the box that had been gift wrapped that had an end open, and I put the .22 revolver in that box, and I put the backpack back on my back, and I took a bunch of roses and I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell, and I was shaking and freaking out at this point because there was nowhere I wanted to be less than at that house on that morning. And when I rang the doorbell, the door opened and a woman came to the front. and I thought it was Christina Parcell, but I wanted to make sure. And I also wanted to make sure that no one else was home. So I told her that while I was holding the box and the roses, that I had a delivery for Lutina Parcell, her sister. And she told me that Lutina wasn't home. So at this point, I realized that Christina was at the house alone. And I handed her the roses. And I took the rose out of the box and I pointed it at her and I told her to be quiet and to go back into the house, which she did. And I followed her into the house and I shut the door. And I was experiencing such anxiety that my body wasn't really doing what I was telling it to do anymore. Like when I realized that I couldn't use the gun, which was unloaded at this point, my plan had been to try to knock her unconscious because I didn't want to cause her or anyone any pain. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to save Aida and to make sure that no one else who was a bystander would be involved in this or could be endangered in any way. So I tried, while she was holding the roses, to strike her on the head and knock her unconscious. But my body was fighting me because even though I knew who she was and what she was doing and the danger that was putting Aida in, I was still looking at her and I was seeing a sympathetic figure. I was seeing a woman, and I had always been taught never to hurt a woman, to always protect women and children. So when I went to strike her with the gun, my hand didn't really do what I was trying to tell it to. I essentially pulled my strike. It felt like a time I had been cliff jumping with friends. I have a big fear of heights, and there was a 30-foot face that you could jump off and jump into a deep pool of water, and when I would run up to the edge, I would try to get a running start and jump off the edge, and I just couldn't. Like my body would stop me against my will. And I had to try to do this 10 or 15 or 20 times before I could actually get myself to go over the edge. So when I struck her on the head with the pistol, that's what happened. It didn't knock her unconscious, and I hardly struck her at all, to be honest. So I tried again, and the same thing happened. I just couldn't bring myself to strike her. And at this point, she realized that I was hesitating, and she began to try to move herself and to get away and to fight back. And during this period of time, the roses had dropped and the petals and stems had scattered.
The prosecution argued the act was calculated and driven by anger.
Your Honor, these are case numbers 2024 GS 23 2194, 5425A, 5413, 5412. As to the charge of murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of burglary first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of harassment first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of harassment second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of conspiracy to commit harassment first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of conspiracy to commit harassment second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Signed by our foreperson.
In early 2025, Zachary Hughes was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. Following Hughes's confession, John Mello was also arrested and charged with criminal solicitation and accessory before the fact. Investigators believe he encouraged and may have helped plan the murder.
On August 16, 2015, the body of 31-year-old Derek Patrick Larson was found in Tautpaus Park, Idaho Falls, with wounds. A passerby discovered the body around 10 a.m., prompting a swift investigation by law enforcement. The investigation led the police to 18-year-old Brian J. Mitchell from Shelley, who was arrested in the early hours of August 20th and charged with second-degree murder.
All right. Let's start with the new case, which is CR 2015-10464. In that case, Mr. Mitchell, I have received a criminal complaint, and a criminal complaint that's been laid before me and sworn by Officer Deedy, alleging one count of murder in the second degree. Have you seen a copy of that criminal complaint?
No, Your Honor.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and read you the complaint. You'll be provided with a copy of that complaint so that you'll be able to see it, but I'll read it to you, at least its pertinent part at this point. It's alleged that you committed murder in the second degree of felony pursuant to Idaho Code 18-4001. Specifically, they allege that you, Brian J. Mitchell, on or about August 16, 2015, in the county of Bonneville, state of Idaho, did unlawfully and with malice aforethought. Is that what you intended? With malice aforethought, murder Derek Patrick Larson, a human being, by stabbing the victim with a knife, thereby causing the death of said victim. Do you understand what they claim you did?
Yes, Your Honor.
The maximum penalty for that, if you were to be convicted of that charge, Mr. Mitchell, is 10 years to life, meaning that life is the maximum, 10 years is the minimum, a $50,000 fine or both fine and prison. In addition, you can be required to pay restitution, and you can be required to pay a $5,000 amount to the victim or the victim's family, which is referred to as a restitution or compensatory bond. In addition, because it's a crime of violence, you can be required to provide a right thumbprint and keep a sample of DNA on file with the Idaho Department of Corrections. Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes, Your Honor.
His bond was set at $500,000, and due to his lack of financial resources, Mitchell was appointed a public defender.
Connections to the community with Mr. Brian Mitchell. I do have an interview from well, it looks like pretrial services did not interview Mr. Mitchell based on the nature of the crime, the strength of the state's case, based on the probable cause that was presented today, the seriousness of the case, potential penalty, which is up to life in prison, the potential for flight because of that, because of the youth of Mr. Mitchell as well. I do think that a high bond is appropriate. The state's recommendation is, in my mind, given the nature of this offense, somewhat low, but given that recommendation, I will set bond in the amount of $500,000 cash assurity. I'll further order that if you do post bond, Mr. Mitchell, that you must sign a waiver of extradition back to the state of Idaho, and you must report to pretrial services for monitoring during the term until this matter is resolved. Furthermore, as a condition of your release, you're not to consume or possess any alcohol, nor you consume or possess any controlled substances not prescribed by a physician. And I think that should take care of the conditions in this case. Do you understand the bond and the conditions?
Yes, Your Honor.
In October 2015, Mitchell pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. At a subsequent court appearance, Mitchell's attorney suggested the killing was an act of self-defense.
Ryan and Derek started talking about oral sex and how they preferred their oral sex and what genders they preferred their oral sex. Who they preferred to have oral sex with. Derek is providing Brian oral sex. Brian wakes up. He's startled by this. He said he was not into that, and he's not sure why Derek would do that. And he proceeds to get up from the bench, and Derek tells Brian, well, we were talking about it earlier, and you said you were okay with this, so it shouldn't be a big deal.
Mitchell's defense revolved around the claim that Larson had made unwanted
advances toward him in the park. He said that when he woke up, Larson was on top of him, attempting to remove his clothes. In what he described as an act of self-defense, Mitchell said he stabbed Larson.
Brian's statement was Mr. Larson was trying to pull Brian's pants down inside the tube. Mr. Mitchell says that he told Mr. Larson, stop, knock it off. If you don't knock it off, I will hurt you. And he stabs Mr. Larson in the face.
However, the prosecution disputed this explanation, arguing that the number of stab wounds suggested the act was not a momentary reaction, but a deliberate attempt to cause harm. Tragically, on December 4th, 2015, Mitchell was found in his jail cell under circumstances that remain unclear, adding a new layer of mystery to the case. Despite this, the investigation into the events leading up to Larson's death continued, leaving the public with lingering questions about both the murder and Mitchell's untimely death. In early 2021, Mark Jason Bent, an automotive technician, moved to Idaho Falls and soon became involved with a local car club called the Castaways, which was co-founded by 23-year-old Nicholas Todd Bird. Bent, much older than the other members, initially tried to fit in, but soon felt alienated. He claimed that Bird and others spread rumors about him, accusing him of being an undercover cop, which led to his growing resentment, particularly towards Bird. By mid-2022, Bent's bitterness deepened. He became consumed with thoughts of revenge, blaming Bird for his perceived rejection. On September 3rd, 2022, Bent went to Bird's neighborhood, where he vandalized Bird's car. When Bird confronted him, Bent pulled out a handgun and shot him, leaving his body on the street. A neighbor heard the shots and saw Bent walking away calmly, which led to a 911 call moments later.
The defendant, Mark Bent, was frustrated, resentful, and bitter. You'll see evidence in this case that will present to you that his life was not going the way that he wanted. He's in his mid-40s. He was not able to really keep a job very well. He was trying to get involved with some friends that wasn't really working out, kind of pushing him out. He was becoming increasingly frustrated, resentful, bitter. You get the sense that he wanted to make a mark, do something that would be meaningful, and it just wasn't happening. And so as he became increasingly angry, the evidence will show that finally he decided to do something, and what he did was he killed a man. He killed a man at 10:30 at night. It was about 2 years ago, September 2022. Happened in a neighborhood here in Idaho Falls, just about 2 miles from where we're at right now. There's a street called Clairview Lane, and that's where he did it. The man he killed was a 23-year-old man, almost a kid, you might say, a young man, 23-year-old Nicholas Bird. Nicholas Bird was already living on his own, lived in an apartment. He was a concrete worker. He loved cars. He was into cars. He was part of a car club. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. He had a girlfriend, and he had parents who loved him. Obviously, this was devastating for everyone that he knew. Mark Bent, the defendant, shot him with a 9mm handgun 17 times. Or at least they found 17 bullet casings surrounding the body of Nick Bird. After he shot him, again it was 10:30 at night, after Mark Bent shot this young man, Mark Bent walked back to his pickup truck, turned around, and left the scene. There was a neighbor, and you'll hear from this neighbor, there was a neighbor across the street from the shooting. He heard the shots, and he looked right out his window, and what did he see? You'll hear from him today. He looked out and he saw Nick Bird lying there in the street. He saw Mark Bent, the defendant, go back to his truck and drive off. Now this neighbor was already on the phone. He was already calling 911 because he heard those shots. He knew it was gunshots. He called 911. As he's on the phone, he's watching Mark Bent take off. So Mark Bent leaves. Police and paramedics arrive very quickly. They do what they can for Nick Bird. Nick Bird wasn't quite dead yet. They're able to take him to the hospital, emergency surgery. He died very quickly there.
After the shooting, Bent sent a message to his parents confessing to the murder, stating, "I have just committed murder," and expressing regret. He also posted on Facebook, admitting his intention to kill Bird and explaining that his main goal was to take his life. Bent eventually called 911 himself, confessing to the crime and agreeing to wait for police to arrive, where he was arrested without resistance. During his trial in December 2024, the prosecution presented evidence of premeditation, including Bent's confessions on social media and his 911 call.
Drove off. And then he did several things that I'm going to tell you about. He drove off, and within just a few minutes, he sends a message, a Facebook message, to his parents, to his own parents. This was just 3 or 4 minutes after the shooting. He sends a message to his parents, and in the message to his parents, he writes this: "I am really sorry to tell you this, but I have just committed murder." That's the message he sends to his mom and dad. "I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I have just committed murder." He adds, "I tried to talk myself out of it." That's the message he wrote to his parents. "I tried to talk myself out of it." Well, apparently he was not able to talk himself out of it because he pulled the trigger 17 times. What else does he do right after? Well, he sends the Facebook message to his parents. Right at that time, shortly after, he calls his father. You're going to hear from his father later today. He calls his father and tells his father that he just shot someone. His father encourages him to turn himself in. Also, right in that same time period, within just several, 10, 15, 20 minutes after the shooting, he posts a public Facebook post. Mark Bent posts a public Facebook post that quite a few friends were able to see. And that Facebook post shows, you'll see this, you'll see it, you'll be able to read it. It shows his plans. His plans to kill Nick Bird. Here's what he said, here's some of the things he said in this Facebook post. He said, "I started to think about attacking one of the car shows they attend. I talked about a car club, and I'll tell you more about this in just a minute, but there's a car club. He was trying to get involved with it. Wasn't really working out well. I started to think about attacking one of the car shows they attend. But my main goal was to kill Nick Bird." Nick Bird is already dead by then. He's just shot him. "My main goal was to kill Nick Bird." And then he says, "I followed said plans." And again, you'll see this message. He finishes his Facebook post by saying, "Let this be a lesson." Let this be a lesson. And you'll see the whole Facebook post is quite long, but these are some of the parts that I pulled out of it. At the end, he says, "Let this be a lesson." He thought about attacking one of the car shows. His main goal was to kill Nick Bird. He followed said plans. Let this be a lesson. Then, he's already talked to his dad. His dad has encouraged him to turn himself in, and he does go ahead and turn himself in. So Mark Bent, the defendant, called 911 on himself. He did this about 30 minutes after the shooting. He's now in the parking lot of Albertsons. There's an Albertsons on 17th Street in Idaho Falls, if you're familiar with that. He goes there, he parks there, he calls 911 on himself. So the dispatcher answers the phone, and she says, what's your emergency? He says, I need to turn myself in. And so the dispatcher starts asking questions. I need to turn myself in, okay, what's going on? He says, I shot someone. She asks more questions, where are you right now? Who are you? What's your name? Who's the guy that you shot? Where's the gun? And he answers those questions.
Bent testified that he had blacked out during the shooting and was struggling with mental health issues. However, the prosecution argued that his actions were calculated and not a result of a sudden outburst.
Sentencing that I am bound by the Idaho Supreme Court. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to the Idaho Department of Corrections as follows. For count 1, murder in the first degree, that you be given a 30-year determinate period of incarceration followed by a life indeterminate period of time. In addition to that, you will have, because of the enhancement, the additional 15 years for enhancement. There will be a fine of $5,000 plus court costs. There will be a $5,000 civil penalty. While you're incarcerated, given the evaluations from Dr. Hatzenbuehler, I'm going to order that you seek treatment for the mental health issues that have been unattended for all these years, plus the substance abuse issues. You will be required to reimburse the public for your attorney services in the amount of $1,000.
Bent was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison in February 2025. The judge emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime and the role social media played in escalating the conflict. Bent expressed remorse, but the damage had already been done, leaving a young man dead and his own life in ruins. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.